Chapter 1. The Spark of Life. Bologna, November 1780. The rain clawed at the shutters of the anatomy hall, a ceaseless tapping like skeletal fingers demanding entry. Within, the chamber was a cavern of stone and shadow. The vaulted ceiling swallowed the light of 100 candles, their flames guttering in the draught that crept through cracks in the ancient walls. The air was dense with damp chalk dust, with a musk of wet wool from the cloaks of the assembled students. They pressed close upon the benches. Their faces were pale ovals in the gloom, and their breath rose in muzzy clouds. Some whispered prayers, others exchanged nervous laughter, but all eyes were fixed upon the table at the front of the hall. Upon it lay a frog, wired to a strange electrical device. The instruments beside it shined like weapons in the candlelight. Professor Luigi Galvani entered without ceremony as his black robe brushed the stone floor. He was not a tall man, but his presence filled the room. His glossy eyes surveyed the crowd. In his hand, he carried a slender rod of polished brass. The professor paused, letting the silence deepen until the only sound was the rain outside. Then he spoke, his voice strong and deliberate. "Gentlemen," he said, "you are about to behold a mystery, not of heaven, but of earth, not of the soul, but of the spark." A murmur rippled through the hall. One student rolled his eyes, another leaned in, ink-stained fingers fluttering, as though he was already taking notes. The professor raised the rod. The students held their breath. The brass touched flesh. The frog's leg kicked out vigorously against its restraints. A scream tore through the hall. "It moves!" cried a young man in the front row. "By God, it moves!" Another student recoiled. His lips quivered. "But it is dead. How can the dead move?" Galvani, unshook, touched the rod again. And again the frog twitched, its lifeless body animated by invisible fire. "Because death is not silence," he said. "It is a language, and tonight you shall hear it spoken in lightning." The students' reactions. The hall burst with commotion. Some held their sights on the instruments, insatiably curious. Others shrank back, as though fearing the spark might zap from the table into their own veins. A tall student with piercing eyes raised his voice above the din. "Professor, is this not proof that electricity is the very essence of life?" Galvani hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Perhaps. Or it is only the key that unlocks the door. The soul may still dwell elsewhere." The skeptic sneered. "You play with corpses, sir. You make them dance like marionettes, but you have not given them life." There was silence. All eyes turned to Galvani. His voice, when it came, was sharp like a blade. "And yet, when the storm rages, when lightning strikes, do we not feel the same spark in our own veins? Tell me, is that not life?" The question hung in the air, unsettling in its simplicity. Some nodded, others frowned, but none could answer. Another student, bearing a concerned countenance, inquired, "If the dead may be made to move, then what separates us from them? What keeps us from being but machines of flesh?" Galvani fixed his eyes on him, and for a moment his expression softened. "That, my boy, is the question that haunts me." A clash of belief. From the back of the hall, a voice rang out, deeper and older than the students. A rival professor, draped in heavy robes, had risen to his feet. His face was somber, his eyes dark with disapproval. "Professor Galvani," he said, "you trespass upon sacred ground. To suggest that the soul is but a current, a trick of lightning, this is blasphemy." Galvani turned to face him, his jaw tightening. "I do not deny the soul, sir. I only seek to understand the vessel in which it resides." The older man spoke louder. "And in your seeking, you risk leading these young men astray. You risk teaching them that man is no more than a machine, that God's breath is but a spark, to be imitated. Several students voiced their agreement. Others looked torn, caught between reverence and curiosity. Galvani lifted the rod once more, his hand steady. If God has written his laws into the flesh, then is it not our duty to read them? If lightning animates the heavens, why should it not also animate the body? The rival professor's eyes grew darker. You would make yourself a Prometheus, stealing fire from the heavens. Beware, sir. The punishment for such theft is eternal. Galvani's smile was rebellious. Then let me be burned, if only for a moment I may glimpse the truth. The debate. The storm outside had grown more violent, thunder rolling across the city like the growl of some unseen beast. Within the anatomy hall, the debate raged with equal ferocity. The rival professor, his face flushed with indignation, raised his hand toward the pinned frog, as though it were an idol of heresy. You see, gentlemen, what comes of meddling with mysteries not meant for mortal hands. This is not science. It is a trick of nerves, nothing more. A student near the front jumped to his feet. Then let us have more trickery, sir, but I think it not. If the dead may be made to stir, then surely we stand at the threshold of revelation. The older man's voice rattled. Revelation or damnation? You would trade your soul for a twitch of flesh. Galvani raised his voice. Enough. You speak of damnation, but I speak of knowledge. If God has written his laws into the body, then to study them is no sin. To ignore them would be the greater blasphemy. The rival professor's eyes narrowed. And when your students leave this hall, believing they may conjure life from death, what then? Will you answer for their souls? Galvani's hand tightened on the brass rod. His gaze swept the room and met the eyes of each engaged, expectant face. I will answer only for the truth, he said, and the truth is this. The body is not a tomb, but a vessel. Within it runs a current, unseen yet undeniable. Call it what you will, electricity, lightning, fire. It is the same force that splits the heavens. And tonight, you have seen it stir the dead. The room went quiet. A mysterious draught swept through the room and extinguished several candles, as if the storm had leaned in to listen. The students whispered fears. When the lecture ended, the students spilled into the corridors, the sound of their footsteps thumping on the stone. Some argued heatedly, others expressed nervous excitement, but all carried the image of the kicking frog burned into their minds. Two young men stood near the doorway, their cloaks flapping in the wind. It is blasphemy, one whispered, to make the dead move. It is an affront to heaven. No, it is a milestone, the other surmised. If death can be reversed, even for a moment, then what is impossible? Their words drifted back into the hall where Galvani stood alone, gathering his instruments. He heard them, and though he said nothing, a subtle smile emerged. The haunted study. That night, Galvani sat in his study, the storm still raging beyond the shutters. The frog lay upon the table, its limbs slack, its pale skin reflecting the candlelight. Lucia, his wife, entered reluctantly, her shawl drawn close against the chill. She paused at the sight of the creature, her face discomfited. Luigi, she said softly, must it remain here? It unsettles me. Galvani looked up from his notes. It is not the frog that unsettles you, my dear, but what it represents. She stepped closer, looking disgustedly on the lifeless form. It is unnatural to make the dead move. It is as though you mock God's creation. His eyes shined with fervor. On the contrary, Lucia, I honor it. What is life, if not motion? And if motion can be summoned by a spark, then perhaps the soul is not divine at all, but natural, a current that flows through us, waiting to be harnessed. She touched his arm gently. And if you are wrong, if you call forth something that should not be called. For a moment, the thunder outside drowned out his reply. When it passed, his voice was almost a whisper. Then let me be damned for seeking truth. Better that than to live in ignorance. Lucia drew back, her eyes misting over with unease. She turned away, leaving him alone with his instruments, his notes, and the intensity of the room. The storm did not abate. It prowled the city through the night, rattling shutters, shaking tiles loose from rooftops, and rolling thunder across the hills like the growl of some vast predator. In his study, Luigi Galvani, oblivious to the tempest outside, scratched his quill furiously, ink blotting the pages with diagrams of nerves, sketches of lightning bolts, and words that seemed half confession, half incantation. The frog lay nearby, its body stiffening with death, yet in Galvani's mind it still convulsed with that uncanny spark. He could not look away from it. The candlelight made its skin gleam like wax, its limbs splayed in a twisted parody of the living. He muttered to himself, as though afraid the shadows might overhear. Motion. Motion is life. If motion can be summoned, then life itself may be summoned. The soul, perhaps, it is not divine breath, but current, a river of fire that flows unseen. His thoughts opposed the words, yet his hand still wrote them. He paused, staring at them, then struck through the line with a violent slash of ink. To write such things was dangerous. To believe them was perilous. Yet the thought would not leave him. Lucia's plea. The door creaked open. Lucia entered again. She hesitated at the threshold, as though the room itself repelled her. Luigi, she said delicately, you have not slept. The storm has raged all night, and still you sit here with your creature. He looked up from the paper and into her sad eyes. It is not a creature, Lucia. It is a key to the greatest mystery of all. She stepped closer, her eyes glanced at the frog. And if the door it opens leads not to truth, but to damnation? His eyes perplexed, his face gleaming in the frantic light. Would you have me turn away, Lucia? Would you have me close my eyes to the fire that burns in the heavens, the fire that livens the flesh? If God has hidden his secrets in lightning, then surely he intends us to find them. Her voice broke. You speak as though you would rival him. Galvani's lips curved into a bitter frown. No, my love, not a rival. Only understand. Only touch the hem of his garment. She shuddered, drawing her shawl tighter. Then promise me this, that you will not go further, that you will not seek to make the dead rise. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the thunder outside. Then Galvani lowered his gaze. I cannot promise what I do not know. Lucia turned away, tears shimmering in her eyes. She left the room, and the shadows that drew closer with every flicker of the candle. The nephew's shadow. In the weeks that followed, Galvani's lectures grew more daring. He spoke of currents, of hidden fires, of the body as a vessel of unseen forces. Some students recoiled, others held hungry eyes. Among them was a young man with dark hair and a restless appearance, Giovanni Aldini, Galvani's nephew. Aldini watched his uncle with rapt attention, his mind racing faster than the words spoken aloud. Where Galvani hesitated, Aldini hungered. Where Galvani whispered of possibilities, Aldini dreamed of triumphs. One evening, after the hall had emptied, Aldini approached his uncle. Uncle, he said, his voice kind but urgent, You speak of sparks and currents as though they are glimpses of heaven. But why stop at glimpses? Why not seize the fire itself? Galvani looked at him sharply. Because fire burns, Giovanni. It consumes. To touch it is to risk destruction. Aldini's eyes lit up. His voice deepened. And yet Prometheus touched it. He stole it from the gods and gave it to men. Would you have us remain in darkness when the spark lies within our grasp? Galvani's tone was earnest. Do not speak so lightly of theft from heaven. Prometheus was punished. Then let us be punished, Aldini asserted, if punishment is the price of greatness. For a long moment, uncle and nephew stared at one another, the storm outside mimicking the storm within. Then Galvani turned away, his shoulders heavy with weariness. Go home, Giovanni, he said. You are young. Do not let ambition blind you. But Aldini did not leave at once. He lingered, fixated on the instruments, on the frog's lifeless body, on the brass rod that had conjured motion from death. In his mind, he saw not frogs, but men. Men who might twitch, perhaps even rise. When at last he departed, his words stayed in Galvani's conscience. The storm that had haunted Bologna's skies gave way to a brittle winter. Snow lay in the narrow streets like a shroud, muffling the sound of carriage wheels and footsteps. Yet within the university, the air was no less charged. Galvani's lectures had become the talk of the city. Some deemed the idea of reanimating the dead as revelation. Others thought it heresy. In taverns, men spoke of sparks that mocked the silence of the grave. Preachers and priests stood on the streets protesting that such experiments trespassed upon God's dominion. And in the lecture halls, students argued until their voices grew hoarse, caught between fascination and fear. Among them, Giovanni Aldini thrived. Aldini's ambition. He was young, handsome, and restless, his dark eyes alight with a fire that seemed to burn hotter than his uncle's measured curiosity. One evening, as snow fell thick against the windows, Aldini confronted his uncle in the study. The frog still lay preserved in spirits, its withered body floating like a relic of some strange saint. Uncle, Aldini said fervently, you have shown the world a glimpse of the spark. But a glimpse is not enough. The people hunger for spectacle. They must see with their own eyes that death itself may be defied. Galvani's face was drawn with fatigue. Spectacle is not science, Giovanni. To chase applause is to lose the truth. Aldini's lips edged into a defiant smile. And yet, without applause, who will listen? Who will fund your instruments, your experiments? The world does not reward whispers, uncle. It rewards thunder. Galvani set down his quill. His face dropped. You speak as though you would turn the dead into puppets for the amusement of crowds. Not amusement, Aldini persisted. Enlightenment. Imagine it, uncle. The body of a man, newly dead, presumably coming back to life under the power of lightning. The crowd would see it, and they would believe. Not in God's mysteries, but in ours. Galvani's eyes went wild. You go too far, Giovanni. To touch the dead is to invite damnation. Aldini's eyes turned bright. Or immortality. Whispers of scandal, word of Aldini's ambitions spread quickly. Students huddled, repeating his boasts, that he would make corpses rise, that he would prove the soul a myth, that he would seize the fire of heaven itself. In the taverns, the talk grew darker. They say the nephew means to rob graves. I overheard that he has petitioned the magistrates for the bodies of criminals. He means to make the dead walk. Priests denounced him, warning his heresy would bring ruin upon the city. Yet the people came in greater numbers to the lectures, eager to see whether the rumors were true. Galvane's fear. At home, Galvane was depleted. He pored over his notes, his eyes hollow. Lucia watched him with silent dread. One evening, she found him staring at the preserved frog, his face like stone. "Luigi, you must stop!" she insisted. "Giovanni's ambition will destroy you both." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "Do you think I do not know? He is fire, Lucia, and I am but the tinder. He will burn, and I with him." She touched his hand. "Then leave it. Leave the spark to die." But Galvane shook his head, his voice breaking. "It is too late. The spark is alive. It will not die. It will spread." Lucia sighed and left the room, unable to respond, as though her spirit was in shock. She worried for him and Aldini, but more for what may be unleashed upon mankind. The gallows had done its work. The body of George Forster, condemned for the drowning of his wife and child, hung limp in the winter air until the rope was cut, and he was delivered to science. By the time Giovanni Aldini stood before him, the corpse was still warm, the face slack, the eyes half closed. The chamber was crowded. Physicians, magistrates, journalists, and curious onlookers pressed shoulder to shoulder, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Candles sputtered in iron sconces, the smell of tallow mingled with the sharper tang of death. Aldini stood at the center, his dark eyes beaming. In his hands he held the notorious instruments, wires, rods, and a voltaic pile that hummed quietly with unseen power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his Italian accent rolling through the chamber, "today you shall see the boundary between life and death be tested." Among the crowd were expressions of curiosity and equal amounts of trepidation. A woman in the back clutched her shawl, her lips moving in silent prayer. Aldini gestured to his assistants. They lifted the corpse onto the table, arranging it with awkward care. The head lolled to one side, the tongue protruding slightly. The crowd winced, yet none looked away. The first spark. Aldini pressed the sparking electrodes to the corpse's face. The jaw moved, the eyes rolled open. A scream tore from the back of the room. A woman fainted, collapsing into the arms of her companion. "Again!" Aldini cried, his voice exultant. He touched the wires to the chest, the body convulsed, arms flailing as though to ward off unseen attackers. Cries filled the chamber. A journalist scribbled furiously on his paper. "It is as if the man resists his own death," he uttered, his face appalled. A clergyman stepped forward, his voice outraged. "This is sacrilegious! You desecrate the dead! You mock the soul!" Aldini turned to him, his eyes blazing. "I do not claim to restore the soul, sir, but I tell you this. The body is not a tomb. It is a vessel, and electricity is its fire." He pressed the electrodes once more. The corpse's legs kicked violently, striking the table with a hollow thud. Some were impressed, others horrified. The crowd reacts. In the back row, two men argued. "It is sorcery," one stated harshly. "He calls demons into the flesh." The other shook his head. "No, it is an awakening. What if life can be restored?" Aldini overheard them. "Behold the spark of life," he testified. "Not myth, not miracle, but truth. The fire that animates the heavens also animates us. And tonight, you have seen it with your own eyes." The corpse quivered again, as if in agreement. The journalist's pen. Later that night, in the cramped office of a London newspaper, the journalist dipped his quill and began to write. His words flowed swiftly. This day, the Italian professor Giovanni Aldini did present to the public a most dreadful spectacle. The body of a criminal, lately executed, was made to move, to breathe, to open its eyes as though resurrected. The crowd, struck with terror, could scarce believe their senses. Some fled, others fainted, yet the professor declared it proof that electricity is the very essence of existence. He paused, glaring at the words. Would readers believe him, or would they dismiss it as exaggeration? He shrugged and continued. The truth was almost beside the point. What mattered was the image, the dead, made to rise. London, January 1803. Interlude. Whispers in the dark. The city did not sleep that night. From the taverns of Fleet Street to the dark alleys of Whitechapel, the tale spread like fire from roof to roof. Men hunched over tankards of ale, their voices low, their eyes darting toward the door, as though fearful the dead themselves might enter. They say Aldini made the corpse sit upright. No, you've heard it wrong. The man walked, I tell you. Walked across the chamber like a puppet on strings. Fool, he spoke. That's what I heard. He opened his mouth and begged for mercy. Each retelling grew darker, more disturbing, until the line between fact and nightmare blurred. The hanged criminal, George Forster, was no longer a man, but a spectre, a warning, a legend. The townsfolk carried a single refrain. The dead had risen. A letter never sent. In a cramped lodging house near the Strand, a young student of medicine sealed his letter addressed to a friend in Edinburgh. I was there, James. I saw it with my own eyes. The body convulsed, its eyes opened, its chest heaved as though it drew breath. I swear to you, for a moment I believed the man lived again. Yet Aldini claimed no miracle, only science. He spoke of currents, of fire in the veins, of the body as a machine. If this be true, then what need have we of the soul? What need have we of God? The student contemplated it, and ultimately decided not to send it. Some truths were too damaging to commit to the post. The rumor's reach. By morning, pamphlets littered the streets. Some denounced Aldini as a heretic, a conjurer of demons. Others hailed him as a genius, a prophet of a new age. Children spread the tale in alleyways, their games turning to mock resurrections. Preachers emerged from pulpits, warning that the end of days was near. And in the quiet corners of drawing rooms, among poets and philosophers, the rumors took on a different shape. They spoke of Prometheus, of stolen fire, of the thin veil between life and death. In Scotland, for instance, another physician who was gaining attention, Andrew Ure, had his own gruesome displays of the twitching dead. Members of a captivated audience, some gasping, others murmuring in disbelief, witnessed the demonstrator apply electrical stimulation to an executed criminal named Matthew Clydesdale. Ure caused the dead man on the table to express emotions of joy, despair, agony, and rage. The final grimace on the criminal's seemingly alive face ended with the opening of his left eye, leaving many in utter disbelief, or fear that he may rise. A shadow across the sea. Far from London and Scotland, in the German states, the stories reached the ears of those who already knew of darker experiments. They spoke of a man who had lived a century before, a man who had haunted the halls of Castle Frankenstein. Johann Conrad Dippel, alchemist, anatomist, heretic. Some said Aldini's and Ure's sparks were but the echoes of Dippel's fire. Others claimed the Italian had merely awakened what the German had begun. And so the legend leapt across borders, across generations, weaving itself into a tapestry of fear and fascination. Thus ended the first spark. What began as a twitch of a frog's leg in Bologna had become a spectacle in London, a tale whispered in taverns, a rumor that refused to die. The dead had risen, if only for a moment, and the world would never be the same. The tales would not fade. They would grow, reaching back into the shadows of Castle Frankenstein, where another man had once sought the secret of life. Chapter 2. The Alchemist of Castle Frankenstein, Hesse-Darmstadt, Winter, 1700. The wind howled across the Odenwald hills, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant toll of a church bell. Perched upon a crag of rock, its towers clawing at the sky, stood Castle Frankenstein. Its stones were black with age, its windows narrow slits that glowed faintly with candlelight. To the villagers below, it was less a fortress than a blister upon the earth, a place where shadows stayed long after the sun had fled. They gossiped of the man who lurked within. Johann Conrad Dippel, alchemist, physician, heretic. Dippel had signed a number of his academic papers as Frankenstein, being born in the estate of the namesake. Some said he trafficked with demons, others that he sought the philosopher's stone. But all agreed on one thing. Where Dippel walked, the dead did not rest easy. The arrival. On a night when the snow fell heavy and the moon was veiled, a traveller approached the castle gates. He was a young theology student from Gießen, sent by his master to deliver a letter. His breath steamed in the cold, his boots crunched on the frozen earth, and his heart pounded with dread. The gates creaked open at his knock, and a servant led him through corridors that smelled of smoke and strange chemicals. The walls were lined with shelves of jars that held things better left unnamed. At last he was brought to a chamber where Dippel himself awaited. The Alchemist. Dippel was a tall man, lank but intense, his hair wild, his eyes burning with a feverish light. He wore a black coat stained with ink and chemicals, and his hands were long and withered, the fingers of a man accustomed to both quills and scalpels. "So," Dippel said, his voice resonant, "they send me a boy with their letters. Do they think me so harmless?" He stuttered, I am only a messenger, Herr Doctor." Dippel's mouth formed a sly smirk. "All men are messengers, boy. Some carry words, others carry fire. Which are you, I wonder?" The student swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the table behind Dippel. Upon it lay the bones of some animal, wired together with iron, as though awaiting animation. Beside it, a cauldron bubbled, releasing a stench of sulfur and decay. Dialogue in the shadows. The student found his courage. "They say you seek to make an elixir of life, that you would cheat death itself." Dippel smirked. "They say much, and most of it is true. Why should death be the end, when the body is but matter, and matter may be shaped, transformed, renewed? The soul, they tell us, flies to heaven. But what if the soul is nothing more than a vapor, a current, a spark? What if it may be caught, bottled, returned?" The student sneered. "Such thoughts are dangerous." Dippel inched nearer to him, his breath hot with the scent of wine and smoke. "Dangerous? Yes, but so is fire, and yet men warm themselves by it. Would you rather freeze in ignorance or burn with knowledge?" The boy could not answer. The village of Niederbierbach lay in the shadow of the castle, its cottages crouched low against the wind. By day, smoke rose from their chimneys in thin, desperate threads. By night, the shutters were barred tight, as though to keep out more than the cold. Stories of Dippel were heavy themes among the villagers. They said he prowled the graveyard by lantern light, that he boiled bones in cauldrons, that he sought to distill the soul into a vial of black oil. Mothers warned their children not to wander near the castle, lest the doctor snatch them for his experiments. old men swore they had seen unnatural things in the tower at midnight, and heard cries that were not wholly human. The student's unease. The theology student who had delivered the letter remained at the castle longer than he wished. Dipple had commanded it, and none dared disobey him. Each night, the boy lay awake in his narrow chamber, listening to the sounds that drifted through the stone corridors, the scrape of metal, the hiss of boiling liquid, the muffled thud of something heavy dragged across the floor. One night, unable to bear his curiosity, he crept from his bed and followed the glow of torchlight down into the lower chambers. The air grew colder, damper, thick with the reek of rot. At last he came to a door, left slightly ajar. Through the crack, he saw Dipple bent over a table. Before him lay the body of a dog, its chest split open, its organs revealed. Wires of copper and iron snaked across the carcass, leading to a crude apparatus that hummed. The boy stifled a cry. His hand trembled against the doorframe. Dipple's voice carried softly, as though he spoke to the dead beast. "You are not gone. You are only waiting. The fire will return to you, and you will rise." He touched a rod to the wires. The dog's limbs jerked, its head snapped back, its jaws clamped shut with a sound like breaking bone. The boy fled, his heart pounding, his breath ragged. He did not stop until he had thrown himself upon his bed, pulling the blanket over his head as though it might shield him from the memory. Dipple's philosophy. The next morning, Dipple summoned the student to his chamber. His eyes burned with sleepless intensity, his hands stained with ink and blood. "You spied upon me," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. The boy stammered. I could not sleep. I heard." Dipple silenced him with a raised hand. "Good. Curiosity is the beginning of wisdom. Fear is the beginning of power. You saw the truth, boy. Death is not an end, but a veil, and veils may be torn aside." The student uttered, "But the soul!" Dipple's laugh was malign. "The soul, a superstition, a word priests use to keep men in chains. No, what animates us is fire, chemical, electrical, divine only in its power, and I will master it." His voice dropped. "Imagine it. A man who cannot die. A body renewed, perfected, eternal. That is the elixir I seek, and when I find it, the world will revel." The boy could not meet his gaze. He felt as though he stood at the edge of an abyss, and Dipple beckoned him to dive. The snow lay heavy upon the churchyard, muffling the earth. The silence was broken by villagers chattering from hearth to hearth, from tavern to tavern, about Dipple and his forbidden experiments. "They say he digs at night," muttered a farmer, his eyes darting toward the hill where the castle loomed, "that he pries open coffins and carries the bones back to his tower." An old woman spat into the fire. "I saw him once, lantern in hand, his cloak black as the grave. He walked among the stones as though they were his garden, and when he passed, the dogs howled." Children huddled close, wide-eyed, as their elders spoke of Dipple's deeds. Some claimed he boiled corpses in great vats, seeking to distill their essence into a black oil that could grant eternal life. Others swore he trafficked with spirits, bargaining for secrets no mortal should know. The student's discovery. The theology student, still trapped within the castle's walls, began to notice things he had not seen before. A stain upon the stair that looked too dark for wine. A bundle carried swiftly through a corridor, its shape disturbingly human. The smell of earth and decay clinging to Dipple's cloak when he returned from his nocturnal wanderings. One night, unable to quell his dreadful curiosity, the boy followed once again. He crept through the corridors, his heart hammering. He again came to a door, ajar. From within was the sound of boiling liquid and the acrid stench of chemicals. He pushed the door wider and froze. Upon the table lay not an animal, but the body of a man. The skin was rotted and white, the lips blue, the eyes closed as if in precarious slumber. Wires of copper and iron coiled across the chest, leading to a crude contraption that sparked faintly. Dipple stood over the corpse, his hands steady, his eyes lit with feverish purpose. "Rise," he whispered. "Rise and prove me right." He touched the rod to the wires. The body's limbs jerked violently, the boy pressing his fist to his mouth. Dipple's voice rose, self-amused. "You see, the spark obeys. Death is but a shadow, and shadows may be banished by fire." The corpse fell still. The boy fled, his footsteps echoing through the stone passageways, his breath ragged with terror. Dipple's confession. The next day, Dipple summoned him again. The boy entered the chamber in guilty measure, certain his spying had been discovered. Dipple regarded him with a strange smile. "You look sickly, boy. Was your sleep troubled?" I dreamt of the dead," the student confessed. Dipple's eyes widened. "Then you dream as I do. Tell me, do you not see the truth? The body is but clay, and clay may be shaped. The soul is but fire, and fire may be stolen. I will forge a man who cannot die. I will tear the secret from the grave itself." The boy argued, "And if God forbids it?" Dipple's laugh was ominous. "Then let him strike me down. Until he does, the fire is mine." The bells of Niederbierbach tolled midnight, their iron voices carried on the wind. In the tavern, men huddled close to the fire, their mugs untouched, their faces distraught. The whispers had grown too loud to ignore. "He steals from the graves," one said, his voice hoarse. "My cousin swears his wife's coffin was empty when they opened it." Another slammed his fist upon the table. "We cannot endure this. He defiles our dead, mocks our faith. If the magistrates will not act, then we must." The men looked to one another, their courage fluttering like the firelight. At last, a small band rose, cloaks drawn tight, lanterns in hand. They would climb the hill to the castle. They would confront the heretic. The confrontation. The gates of Castle Frankenstein loomed before them, black iron against the snow. They hammered upon them with fists and staffs, their voices rising in angry chorus. "Dipple, come forth! You will answer for your crimes!" The gates creaked open. A single figure emerged, his cloak billowing in the wind. Johann Conrad Dipple stood before them, his eyes burning with cold defiance. "You dare disturb my work," he said, his voice carrying like thunder. "You dare accuse me." A farmer stepped forward, lantern in hand. "You rob our graves, you boil our dead, you consort with demons." Dipple's laugh was sinister. "Demons? No, fools. I consort with truth. Your dead rot in the earth, but I would give them new life. You cling to your prayers, but I hold fire in my hands." He raised his arm, and for a moment the villagers thought lightning itself had leapt from his fingers. In truth, it was a spark from the device he carried, but in their terror, it seemed the wrath of heaven. They fled, stumbling down the hill, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Dipple watched them go, his smile thin and cruel. "Let them whisper," he murmured. "Whispers are the seed of legend." The student's crisis. The theology student had watched from the shadows, his heart pounding. He had seen the villagers' fear, heard their accusations, and felt the weight of their truth. Yet he had also seen the spark leap from Dipple's device, had seen the corpse convulse upon the table. That night, he knelt in his chamber, his hands clasped, his voice breaking. "Lord, forgive me. I do not know what to believe. If this man speaks truth, then all I have been taught is a lie. If he lies, Then why does the dead obey him? No answer came. Only the wind howling through the castle's stones, and the hiss of boiling liquid from the chambers below. The climactic experiment. A few days later, Dipple summoned the boy once more. The chamber was lit with dozens of candles, their flames guttering in the draught. Upon the table lay a body, human, unmistakably, its limbs stiff, its eyes closed. Dipple's hands moved with precision, attaching wires, adjusting rods, stoking the apparatus until it hummed with power. "Tonight," he said triumphantly, "you shall see the veil torn aside. Tonight, death itself shall yield." The boy pleaded, "Please, Herr Doctor, do not—" But Dipple silenced him with a glance. He touched the rod to the wires. Its chest heaved, its arms flailed, its mouth opened in a soundless cry. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed to live. The boy screamed. Dipple's laughter rang through the chamber, wild and exultant. "Do you see? Do you see? The fire obeys me. I am master of the spark." The body fell still. The boy fled, his mind shattered by what he had seen. Interlude: the spreading of a name. The villagers never forgot that night when they dared confront the man in the castle. Though they fled before his laughter, they carried the memory back into their homes, their churches, their taverns. And memory became rumor. Rumor became tale. And tale became legend. They say he boiled the bones of men to make his black oil. They say he bargained with the devil himself, and the devil gave him fire. They say he stitched together the dead and gave them momentary life. The words passed from mouth to mouth, carried by merchants along the roads, by soldiers at campfires, by priests who thundered warnings from their pulpits. Soon, the name of Johann Conrad Dipple was known far beyond the Odenwald. A letter from afar. In a dim-lit study in Strasbourg, a scholar wrote to his colleague in Paris, "I have heard of a certain Dipple dwelling in a ruin called Castle Frankenstein. They say he traffics in corpses, that he seeks to distill the very essence of life. Some call him a charlatan, others a genius, but all agree that his experiments are dreadful to behold. If there is truth in these whispers, then perhaps we stand upon the threshold of a new age, an age where death itself may be conquered." The letter was sealed, sent, and read with both intrigue and foreboding. And so the legend reached across borders, carried not by proof, but by fear. The shape of a myth. Years passed, and Dipple's name grew darker still. Children were warned that if they strayed too near the graveyard, the doctor would take them for his potions. Travelers swore they saw dark images among fluttering candlelight in the castle tower, long after Dipple was gone. The truth mattered little. What endured was the image, a haunting figure in a black cloak, prowling among the tombstones, seeking to wrest fire from the dead. And in time, the image would outlive the man. A foreshadowing of lightning. Far away, in another century, another man would stand before a crowd, his hands raised to the heavens, and lightning would obey his command. Where Dipple had been cursed as a heretic, Tesla would be hailed as a wizard. But the thread was the same, the spark, the fire, the dream of mastering life itself. Chapter 3. The Wizard of Lightning. New York City, 1891. The hall was dark, except for the glow of gas lamps, their light trailing the vastness of the chamber. The air was filled with wonder. Hundreds of voices rose like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. At the front of the hall stood a tall, cadaverous figure, his black suit streaming. His demeanor was strange and otherworldly. Nikola Tesla raised his hand. The chatter ceased, with only the sound of howling wind outside. Some swallowed, some moved nervously in their chair, but all stared with attentive curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tesla began, his voice high, "you have come to witness not a trick, not a spectacle, but a revelation. Tonight, I shall show you the fire that dwells in the heavens, and how it may be commanded by mortal hands." He gestured to the great coils that loomed behind him, their copper windings glimmering in the lamplight. Assistants checked wires and adjusted switches. Tesla placed his hand upon the switch. Audience members sat in anticipation. Bolts of lightning from the coils were like jagged spears of white fire crisping through the air. The crowd erupted. Some cried out, others clutched their neighbors. The smell of ozone filled the chamber, sharp and metallic. Tesla stood calm amid the storm, his tall frame illuminated by the arcs of lightning that danced around him. He raised his arms, and the fire seemed to obey, zapping from coil to coil, from rod to rod, as though he were its master. The dialogue of awe. "Good God, he commands the thunder itself," a man in the front row said loudly. His companion shook his head, appearing as though spellbound. "No man commands thunder. This is sorcery." Tesla's voice cut through the crackle of electricity. "Not sorcery, sir. Science. The same fire that splits the heavens flows through these wires. The same spark that moves from cloud to earth may be summoned here, tamed, and made to serve." A woman cried out, "But it is unnatural! To wield such power is to tempt heaven's wrath!" Tesla turned to her, his expression serene. "Unnatural? No, madam. It is nature itself revealed. The lightning you fear is the same that courses through your own veins, the same that stirs the heart to beat. I do not create it. I only reveal it." The crowd was torn between awe and dread. Tesla's solitude. Later that night, when the hall had emptied and the coils stood silent, Tesla remained alone. He walked among the machines, his hand brushing the copper windings as though they were strings of a musical instrument. He said to himself, his voice almost a prayer, "They call it sorcery, they call it madness, but I have seen the truth. The world is fire, and fire is life. If I can master it, then I can give mankind a new dawn." The residual sparks sputtered. Tesla stood in the midst of it, a solitary figure. The newspapers called him a sorcerer. Some hailed him as a prophet, others mocked him as a madman. But all agreed on one thing. Nikola Tesla was unlike any man alive. In the crowded lecture halls of New York, he towered above the arcs of lightning, spitting from his machines. He spoke not as a showman, but as a visionary, his words weaving a spell as potent as the sparks that fizzled through the air. "Imagine," he told his audience, "a world where power flows without wires, where the very air carries fire. Imagine cities lit by invisible currents, ships crossing oceans guided by unseen waves, men speaking across continents as though face to face." There was a consensus of disbelief among the crowd. To them, it was fantasy. To Tesla, it was destiny. The rivalry. But not all shared his vision. In the offices of Thomas Edison, the room was rich with smoke and scorn. Edison, stocky and blunt, dismissed Tesla's alternating current as dangerous, impractical, a folly that would kill men in the streets. "He plays with lightning like a child with matches," Edison growled to his associates, "and like a child he will burn." Yet Tesla pressed on. He staged demonstrations where entire halls were lit by the touch of his hand, where lamps glowed without wires, where sparks acted like living things. The newspapers called it The war of currents, but to Tesla, it was more than war. It was revelation. Dialogue of Fire. One evening, after a particularly dazzling demonstration, a journalist approached him. "Mr. Tesla," he said, his pen poised, "they call you a wizard. Do you deny it?" Tesla's lips bent upward. "Wizard? No, I am but a student of nature. The fire you see is not mine. It belongs to the world. I only show you how to touch it." "But Edison says your current is death itself." Tesla's eyes beamed. "All fire is death if misused, but in the right hands, it is life. Would you call Prometheus a murderer or a savior?" The journalist paused. Tesla turned away, his tall frame silhouetted against the coils that loomed like silent giants. Tesla's vision. Alone in his laboratory, Tesla worked through the night. The chamber was alive with the hum of machines, the array of sparks, the smell of sulfur. He moved among his inventions like a priest among altars, his eyes focused, his hands precise. "The world will be remade," he envisioned. "The spark will extend across oceans, across continents. Men will speak through the air. Light will flow without wires, and death itself may one day yield to the fire." The coils answered with blue and white sparks. It was as though the heavens themselves approved. Colorado Springs, summer, 1899. The plains stretched endless beneath a sky heavy with thunderclouds. On the outskirts of Colorado Springs, a strange structure rose from the earth, a barn-like laboratory crowned with a towering mast of copper. To the townsfolk, it was a curiosity, a menace, a temple to forces best left untouched. Inside, Nikola Tesla prepared his greatest experiment. The floorboards rumbled beneath the weight of his coils, vast machines of copper and iron that wound upward like the organs of some mechanical cathedral. Wires snaked across the floor, humming, alive with unseen power. Tesla stood at the center, tall and spectral. "Tonight," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall, "we shall summon the storm itself." The awakening of the coil. He threw the switch. Bolts of lightning jumped from the great coil. The walls shook, the roof glowed, the mast atop the building threw arcs of levin into the night sky. Outside, the townsfolk panted as the heavens themselves seemed to ignite. The enormous arcs from the mast stretched more than 100 feet, striking the earth with a deep growl as the ground rattled. Horses reared, dogs howled, children clung to their mothers. Within, Tesla raised his arms, his slender frame illuminated by the lightning storm. His voice rose above the thunder. "Behold, the fire of the heavens, tamed! The earth itself is but a conductor, the sky but a reservoir. And I," his eyes blazed, "I am the channel." Dialogue of dread. One assistant, horrified, cried out above the din. "Sir, the power is too great. The coil will tear itself apart." Tesla turned to him, his face tranquil, his voice steady. "Let it tear. Better to burn in revelation than to wither in ignorance." Another shouted, "The townsfolk will think it sorcery." Tesla smiled. "Then let them. Sorcery is but science not yet understood." The coil bellowed, the arcs growing longer, brighter, more violent, the flares beneath the floorboards crawling like serpents of fire. The air itself seemed to react, alive with invisible currents. The aftermath. At last, Tesla threw the switch again. The thunder halted, the lightning died. The silence was broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the ragged breaths of the assistants. Tesla stood in the center, his hair disheveled, his eyes alight with triumph. "I have touched the storm," he insisted. "I have spoken its language, and it has answered." Outside, the townsfolk prayed. Some swore they had seen the devil himself dancing in the lightning. Others claimed Tesla was a prophet, a man chosen by God to wield the fire of creation. But all agreed on one thing: the world would never forget the night the heavens obeyed a man. New York City, 1930s. The city thrived with progress. Automobiles driven down Broadway, skyscrapers clawing at the heavens, radios spreading voices across the air. Yet, in a hotel room at the New Yorker, Nikola Tesla sat alone, hunched, his eyes downward. The world had moved on. Edison was celebrated, Marconi was hailed as the father of radio, and Tesla was remembered as a curiosity, a wizard who had once commanded lightning, but now walked among pigeons in Bryant Park. Still, the fire burned within him. The vision of wireless power. At night, he paced his room, mumbling to himself, his hands frantic. They laughed when I spoke of wireless power. They called it madness, but I have seen it. A tower that will send fire through the air, across oceans, across continents. No wires, no boundaries. The world lit by invisible currents. He saw it in his mind's eye. The Wardenclyffe Tower, rising against the sky, its copper dome gleaming, its coils humming with power. He saw cities in marvelous light, ships guided by unseen waves, men speaking across the world through wireless power. But the tower lay in ruins, dismantled for scrap. The dream had been abandoned. Dialogue of doubt. One evening, a young journalist came to interview him, notebook in hand, as he faced the frail figure in the dank hotel room. "Mr. Tesla," he asked softly, "they say your time has passed, that your visions are dreams, nothing more. What do you say to them?" Tesla's eyes flashed. "Dreams? Yes. But what is progress if not the shaping of dreams into reality? They mocked Columbus, they mocked Galileo, they mocked every man who dared to see beyond the horizon, and yet the horizon moves." The journalist hesitated. "And if the world never believes you?" Tesla leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let the world sleep. I have seen the fire. I have touched it, and once touched, it cannot be forgotten." The isolation. As the years passed, Tesla withdrew further into solitude. He fed the pigeons in the park, speaking to them as though they were his confidants. He walked the streets at night, a radiant figure, a ghost among the living. The newspapers mocked him now, calling him eccentric, mad, a relic of a bygone age. Yet in the shadows, rumors persisted. They say he still commands lightning. They say he has built a death ray, a weapon that could split the earth. They say he speaks with beings from the stars. Tesla had become a legend, half man, half myth, the Wizard of Lightning. New York City, January, 1943. Interlude, the last spark. The news spread quickly. Nikola Tesla was dead, found alone in his hotel room, his body decrepit, his eyes closed. The Wizard of Lightning, who once commanded storms, had died in silence. Yet death did not still the voices of the city. I heard that the government seized his papers. Rumor has it he built a death tower that could throw lightning to vast distances. They say he spoke with unearthly beings. Tesla had become a story, his life a tapestry of fire and shadow. To some, he was a prophet betrayed by the world. To others, a sorcerer who flew too close to the storm. In a newsroom, a young reporter dipped his pen and wrote, "Nikola Tesla is gone, but his visions remain. He dreamed of a world lit without wires, of voices carried through the air, of fire tamed and made to serve. Some called him mad, others a genius. Perhaps he was both, but in his lightning we glimpsed the future." The words were printed, read, forgotten by some, but not by all. For legends do not die, they smolder, waiting for breath to fan them into flame. The Thread of Fire. From Galvani's frog to Aldini's convulsing corpse, from Dippel's castle to Tesla's coils, the thread was unbroken. Always the same spark, the same fire, the same dream of mastering life itself. A century prior, that thread remained, not in a laboratory, but in a villa by a lake, where poets and dreamers gathered on a storm-tossed night. There, by candlelight, a young woman would listen to the thunder and imagine a new Prometheus. Chapter 4. The Night at Lake Geneva. June 1816. The year without a summer. The sky was a bruise of thunderclouds, the lake a sheet of black glass. Rain lashed the shutters of Villa Diodati, and lightning split the heavens with such violence that the poets within fell silent, listening to the storm's voice. The year had betrayed them. Crops failed, frost clung to the fields in June, and the sun itself seemed veiled by ash. The villagers cried of punishment, of omens, of the end of days. But in the villa on the lake, 4 young souls gathered not to pray, but to conjure. Lord Byron, imperious with his strong jaw and curly hair, paced before the fire, his eyes mischievous. Percy Bysshe Shelley sat with restless energy, his hands tossing about, as though the storm outside had entered his veins. John Polidori, Byron's physician, lingered in the shadows, his gaze dark, his thoughts darker still. And Mary Godwin, soon to be Mary Shelley, watched them all, her piercing eyes reflecting the lightning that flared beyond the windows. As the 3 men conversed, Mary slipped into a daydream, recalling a trip she took with her stepmother, stepdaughter, and Percy. 2 years prior to this meeting of creatives, Percy and Mary had become attuned with Galvanism and had heard the stories of experiments that caused the dead to move. Godwin and Shelley had gained knowledge of the atrocities of Conrad Dippel while on their travels. In summer of 1814, the party had been on their way back to England from Switzerland, traveling on a riverboat down the Rhine River. They had passed through France and then stopped in Germany for many hours in the town of Gernsheim, edging the eastern banks of the Rhine. As the group roamed the village for some sustenance, Mary looked into the distance in curiosity. And there it was, a glimpse of Castle Frankenstein. The visible erect towers and steep slate roof resided on a hilltop, just a few miles away on a mountain range. In her interactions with the residents of Gernsheim, Mary asked them of their familiarity with the castle, and they told her of Dippel and his mad experiments with the dead. Mary also recalled the tales her stepmother, Mary Jane Clairmont, had told her. The brothers Grimm's account of Dippel and his attempts to reanimate life through ungodly practices. Clairmont, a translator of the 2 brothers who told fictional, wild stories, could not help but distinguish between folklore and real-life horror when they revealed to her the truths of Castle Frankenstein and what occurred there. Mary Godwin could also not deny the reality of Dipple's nightmarish endeavors while she spoke with locals. They told her of grave digging and walking corpses in the castle as she gazed upon the hill where the heretic resided. Those peaking towers stared back at her, eerily, in confirmation of hellish themes. It wasn't just these stories of Dipple, or her knowledge of Luigi Galvani and Giovanni Aldini, and their twitching, dead subjects. Her soon-to-be husband, Percy Shelley, a student, also conducted his own experiments of galvanism. These were all seeds planted in the nightmares of Mary Shelley, igniting her Prometheus. The Pact. Mary snapped out of her daydream, and Byron turned suddenly, his voice slightly audible over the thunder. "Let us each write a tale of horror. Let us summon phantoms to rival the storm itself." Shelley laughed, though uneasily. "The storm has already written its tale, Byron. Do you not hear it in the roaring outside?" Byron's smile was menacing. "Then let us answer it. Let us prove that man's imagination may rival heaven's fury." Polidori was apprehensive. "And what if the phantoms we summon do not return to their graves?" Mary spoke at last, her voice steady. "Then we shall live with them, for are we not haunted already?" The fire crackled, the storm raged, and the pact was sealed. Mary's vision. That night, Mary lay awake in her chamber. The storm did not relent, and in the flashing of lightning, she saw visions that would not leave her. She saw an eager student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside the thing he had created. She saw the spark leap, the limbs convulse, the eyes open. She saw horror and pity, and the terrible loneliness of a creature born without love. She pressed her hands to her face, trembling. The vision was too vivid, too insistent. It was not a dream, it was a command. Lightning clawed across the heavens, thunder rolled over the lake, and the villa seemed to shake with each strike. Within, the poets gathered close to the fire, their faces shimmering in the yellow glow. Byron poured wine into silver goblets with a shrewd grin. "Tell me, Shelley," he said, "you who worship reason as others worship God. What say you of Galvani's frogs? Do you believe the spark is life itself?" "I have read the accounts," said Shelley. "The dead flesh jerks at the touch of lightning. If the body is but a machine, then why should it not be reanimated? Perhaps the soul is not divine breath, but current." Polidori scoffed, his voice bitter. "And if it is current, then what are we? Puppets of flesh, dancing to the rhythm of unseen wires? No, gentlemen, there is more to man than sparks and sinew. There must be." Byron's smile widened. "Ever the physician, Polidori, always seeking the soul in the marrow. But what if the marrow is all there is? What if heaven is but a storm, and God's voice is thunder?" Mary listened in silence, the firelight sparkling her eyes. When she finally spoke, her words rang in the room. "You speak of sparks and souls as though they are toys. But what of the creature itself? Imagine it, stitched together from the dead, awakened by lightning. Would it not suffer? Would it not cry out for love, for belonging? And if denied, would it not turn upon its maker?" Their tongues froze. Even Byron, ever eager for blasphemy, paused. The storm outside seemed to answer in her stead, a thunderclap shaking the windows. "The debate deepens." Shelley broke the silence in a rich tone. "Mary speaks true. To create life is not triumph, but burden. The creator would be as a god, yet without wisdom, without mercy. What monster might be born of such pride?" Byron laughed. "Then let us write it, Shelley. Let us write of men who would be gods, and of the monsters they unleash." "I shall write of blood and immortality," said Polidori, his eyes excited, "of a man who drinks life from others to preserve his own." Byron raised his goblet. "And I shall write of shadows and phantoms, of the abyss that waits beyond reason." Mary lowered her gaze, her hands shivering in her lap. She saw again the vision that had haunted her chamber, the assembled man, the lifeless form, the spark that summoned motion, the eyes that opened in horror. She declared, "And I shall write of a creature who was born without love." Still, the storm raged on. The rain crashed against the villa, the thunder rolled, and the lightning carved the heavens into jagged scars. Within her chamber, Mary lay restless, her mind occupied by the pact they had made. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, visions rose unbidden, vivid as waking life. She saw a chamber pallidly lit by scattered lamps, the air thick with the odor of chemicals. A sweating student standing over a form, stretched upon a table. The form was monstrous, stitched together from fragments of the dead. The student touched the spark to the wires. The body thrashed, its chest heaving, its eyes snapping open with a terrible awareness. Mary gulped, clutching the blanket to her chest. The vision did not fade. She saw the creature rise, its gaze filled not with malice, but with anguish, with the loneliness of a soul born into a world that would never love it. She whispered into the darkness, "Poor wretch, abandoned at the moment of birth." The thunder answered, rattling the walls. The birth of a tale. When dawn came, damp and cold, Mary descended to the parlor where Byron sat, his eyes alive, pen fidgeting between his fingers. Her eyes heavy from sleeplessness. Shelley and Polidori were in another room already commencing their horror stories. Byron smirked. "Well, Mary, what ghastly tale shall you pen?" She hesitated, as though she would conjure something wicked with her mere reply. She leaned towards Byron, and the words left her. "I have seen a creature, a man made from death, awakened by lightning, a monster, yet pitiable. And I shall write his tale." The storm outside had passed, but within those walls a new storm had been born. The villa still seemed cloaked in shadow. The lake lay black and still with reflected moonlight. Inside the faces of each poet drawn, their voices subdued. The pact of ghost stories had begun as a game, but now it weighed upon them like a curse. Mary sat apart, a notebook open upon a table. She set the pen to paper, the ink spreading like veins across the page. The vision still burned in her mind. The anxious student, the lifeless form, the spark that summoned motion, the anguished awakening. She wrote swiftly, as though afraid the dream might fade if she paused. The group's unease. Byron watched her, his smile thin. "So, Mary, you truly mean to write it? A tale of a man who would be God?" She did not look up. Not God, a man who would be more than man, and in so doing, becomes less. Shelley's voice was urgent. "But Mary, such a tale, will it not terrify? Will it not condemn you as blasphemer?" Mary's pen did not falter. "Then let them condemn me. The vision is not mine to keep. It demands to be told." Polidori's eyes glittered in the firelight. "And what of the creature? Will you make him villain or victim?" Mary paused, her pen hovering. At last, she said, "Both." The fire crackled. The silence deepened. Each of them felt it, the sense that something had been summoned that would not easily be dismissed. Mary's resolve. Later, in the solitude of her chamber, Mary read over the words she had written. They were rough, incomplete, but alive. She felt as though she had given birth to something vast and terrible, something that would outlive her. "You are mine, and yet not mine," she announced to the darkness. "You will walk the world long after I am gone." The wind replied with a whistle. Interlude. The birth of a legend. In the months that followed, Mary Shelley's tale grew from scattered notes into a manuscript, each page steeped in the vision that had seized her that night by the lake. When at last it was published in 1818, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, entered the world quietly, its author unnamed. It spread quickly. Readers spoke of the student who dared to steal fire from heaven, of the creature who rose from death only to be cast into loneliness. It was unlike anything read before. Critics debated its meaning. Was it a warning against hubris, a parable of science unchained? Or was it a lament for the abandoned, the unloved, the outcast? In taverns and salons, the story was retold, embroidered, reshaped. Some swore Mary had drawn upon true accounts: Galvani's frogs, Aldini's convulsing corpses, Ure's emotional carcass, Dippel's graveyard experiments. Others wondered if she had seen more than a dream, that she had glimpsed the very occurrences that haunted those men. The spark had leapt again, from laboratory to legend, from rumor to immortal tale. The cultural afterlife. As the years passed, Frankenstein grew beyond its pages. It stalked the stage in lurid plays, its monster groaning beneath the lightning. It inspired penny dreadfuls, engravings, and illustrations. And in time, it would flash across cinema screens stretching throughout the 20th century. The creature was no longer Mary's alone. It belonged to the world. Chapter 5. The Silver Screen Monster. Universal Studios, California, 1931. The cavernous sound stage was cloaked in darkness, broken only by the glare of arc lamps and the restless shuffle of crew. Wooden sets loomed like cathedrals of nightmare, a laboratory of stone walls, iron railings, and a towering machine bristling with coils and levers. At the center stood James Whale, director, his sharp eyes focused as he surveyed the scene. "Tonight," he proclaimed, "we give Mary Shelley's creature a body. Tonight, the monster lives." Boris Karloff, haggard and weary, sat patiently as makeup artists worked their craft. Hours passed as they layered grease paint, affixed bolts to his neck, and crowned his head with the iconic flat skull. When at last he rose, transformed, a hush fell across the stage. The monster had come to life. The birth on film. The cameras rolled. Colin Clive, as Henry Frankenstein, bent over the slab, his voice manic with victory. "It's alive! It's alive!" The words cut through the sound stage, through the reels of film, and into legend. Lightning flashed across painted skies, machines roared, and Karloff's creature stirred, his body spasmed, his eyes opened with a childlike terror. The crew drew back, though they knew it was artifice. Something in the moment felt real, as though the sparks of Shelley, Galvani, Aldini, Ure, Dippel, and Tesla manifested into celluloid. Dialogue of Shadows. Later in the quiet after filming, Whale spoke to Karloff. "You understand, Boris, this creature is not merely horror. He is tragedy. He is every outcast, every soul unloved." Karloff nodded slowly, his voice muffled by fatigue. "Yes, he is not the villain. He is the victim." Whale smiled lightly. "Then we shall make the world weep for him, even as they fear him." America, 1931. The film opened in theaters draped with velvet curtains, their marquees blazing with a single word, Frankenstein. Crowds gathered in the chill of autumn nights, their breath steaming as they pressed forward, eager and afraid. Inside, the lights dimmed, the projector whirred, and the screen came alive. Audiences gasped as the laboratory thundered with lightning, as Henry Frankenstein cried out, "It's alive!" and the creature stirred upon the slab. Some shrieked, some fainted, others sat transfixed, unable to look away. For though they knew it was only a film, something in the monster's heavy gait, his hollow eyes, his childlike confusion, struck deeper than mere horror. The monster's image. The flat skull, the bolts in the neck, the lumbering walk, these were not Mary Shelley's words, nor Dippel's experiments, nor Tesla's coils. Yet they became the monster. Children retold of him in schoolyards. Cartoonists sketched his silhouette in newspapers. Toy makers carved his likeness in tin and wood. The monster had stepped off the screen and into the world's imagination, his shadow stretching across continents. Dialogue of reception. In a smoky cafe, two critics debated. One, with disdain, argued, "It is fantastical, a carnival trick, Shelley's tale reduced to spectacle." The other, his eyes haunted, "No, it is tragedy. Did you not see the creature's eyes? He is not villain, but victim. He is every soul unloved." Their words mimicked the very dialogue once spoken by Whale and Karloff in the film studio. The monster was both terror and pity, both horror and lament. The cultural spark. Soon, the film crossed oceans. In London, in Paris, in Berlin, audiences withdrew and wept. The monster became a universal figure, a mirror of human fear and longing. And so the spark leapt again, from Shelley's storm-haunted villa, from Dippel's castle, from Tesla's coils, into the silver screen. The myth was reborn, clothed in film, destined to spook the century. Hollywood, 1935. The success of Frankenstein was enormous, but James Whale was not finished. 4 years later, he returned to the story with a vision darker, stranger, and more tragic. The sets were grander, the shadows deeper, the lightning brighter. And at its heart, Karloff's monster returned, not as a mere terror, but as a soul yearning for companionship. The film opened with a prologue. Mary Shelley herself, portrayed in candlelight, recounting the tale as though it were history. Then the story unfolded, and the monster's loneliness became its true horror. The Bride. In the climactic laboratory, amid coils and thunder, the monster beheld his mate, stitched, awakened, her hair crowned with a lightning-white streak. For a moment, hope glimmered in his hollow eyes. But the bride recoiled, her scream piercing the storm. "She hates me," the monster whispered, his voice heavy with despair. "Like the others." He turned to Frankenstein, his voice breaking. "We belong dead." And with a final gesture, he pulled the lever, bringing the tower crashing down in fire and ruin. Audiences shed tears. The monster was no longer a villain, but a tragic figure, doomed by the very humanity he sought. Dialogue of legacy. After watching the film, two men bickered in a hazy theater lobby. One said, "It is horror, nothing more, a grotesque spectacle." The other shook his head. "No, It is Shakespearean. The monster is Lear, Hamlet, every tragic soul cast out by fate. Their words resonated across decades. The monster had become more than Shelley's creation, more than Whale's vision. He was an archetype, the outcast, the unloved, the eternal wanderer. The sequels and beyond Universal returned again and again. Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein. Each time the monster lumbered forth, his image more fixed, his legend more enduring. Children donned masks of his face on Halloween. His likeness appeared in comic books, advertisements, even breakfast cereals. The monster had become both terror and parody, tragedy and icon. 1930s. 1950s. Interlude from film to archetype. The monster had escaped the laboratory of Universal Studios. No longer confined to Shelley's pages or Whale's movie set, he wandered freely through the imagination of the world. His flat skull and neck bolts became more familiar than the faces of kings. He grinned from comic books, advertisements, and novelty toys. He was invoked in jokes, in nightmares, in scary tales told by flashlight. Frankenstein became an eternal archetype. The monster in the modern age. As the decades turned, during the Cold War years, the monster was applied as metaphor. The dangers of science unchained, the terror of weapons that might annihilate the world. In classrooms, he was studied as literature. In pulp magazines, he was reborn as science fiction. Each retelling reshaped him, but the core remained. A being stitched from death, awakened by fire, abandoned by his maker. The thread continues. From Galvani's frogs to Aldini's corpses, from Ure's livening the dead to Dippel's castle, and to Tesla's coils, from Shelley's storm-lit vision to Whale's silver screen, always the same spark, leaping across centuries. The monster was no longer bound to one age, one medium, one form. He was forever entangled in human existence. Boston, 1995. The hospital scene. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. In the waiting room, a family huddled together, their faces sad, their hands clasped in silent prayer. The monitors had flatlined, the surgeon's voice had been grim. They expected the worst. Inside the operating theater, the young man lay motionless beneath the glare of surgical lamps. The heart monitor screamed its single, continuous tone. Nurses moved quickly, their voices taut with urgency. "Flatline! No pulse!" The surgeon's jaw tightened. He seized the paddles, their metal gleaming. "Charge to 200! The defibrillator machine hummed, a rising whine like the gathering of a storm. He pressed the paddles to the chest. "Clear!" The body convulsed, lifted by the jolt. The monitor spoke, then fell silent again. "Charge to 300. Another jolt, another convulsion. Still silence. The family in the waiting room clung to one another, bracing for the words they dreaded. "Charge to 360. The surgeon's eyes burned with determination. He pressed the paddles once more. The body arched, the monitor stuttered. Then, suddenly, a rhythm. A pulse, a heartbeat. The surgeon's voice rang out. "He's alive!" Echoes of the spark. In the waiting room, the doors burst open. A nurse, breathless, spoke the words the family scarcely dared to hope for. "He's alive! He's coming back!" Tears flowed, prayers turned to sobs of relief. and in that sterile room, beneath the hum of machines, the echo of Mary Shelley's vision resounded once more. The spark, the fire, the cry of triumph. It had leapt again, from castle to coil, from cinema to hospital. Chapter 6. The Modern Prometheus Reborn. 20th Century. The Soviet Connection. The Laboratories of Resurrection. In the 1920s and 30s, Soviet scientists pursued experiments that seemed torn from the pages of Shelley. Sergei Bryukhanenko, a physiologist, unveiled his autojector, a primitive heart-lung machine. In demonstrations, he kept the severed head of a dog alive, its eyes blinking, its tongue lapping water. Audiences expressed both horror and fascination. The West announced, "Frankenstein lives in Moscow." The defibrillator and the spark. By mid-century, Soviet doctors were also pioneers in resuscitation. They experimented with early defibrillation, using electric shocks to restart hearts. In hospitals from Moscow to Leningrad, the cry of "It lives" resounded in sterile wards, just as it had in Boston, New York, and London. Electricity was no longer just metaphor, it was medicine. Yet the symbolism was unmistakable. The same spark that animated Shelley's monster now flowed from Soviet machines into human chests. Dialogue of Ideology. In a lecture hall in Moscow, a party official addressed young scientists. "Comrades, the West has its myths of monsters and madmen. But here, in the Soviet Union, electricity is not horror. It is progress. We do not fear it. We master it. We wield it for the people, for the future." Yet in the back rows, students were uneasy. They had seen the films of Bryukhanenko's experiments. They had heard rumors of bodies shocked back to life, and they could not help but think of Shelley's tale, of the thin line between triumph and terror. The Cold War, Frankenstein. As the Cold War deepened, the Frankenstein myth became a metaphor on both sides. In the West, Soviet science was painted as monstrous, tampering with life itself. In the East, Western nuclear weapons were the true Frankenstein's monster, an invention that threatened to destroy its maker. The myth had become global, a mirror in which every nation saw its own fears reflected. The promises of reanimated life inspired by galvanism, elixirs, controlled electrical currents, and Mary Shelley's vision had spread to Soviet laboratories. The thread was unbroken, always the same ignition, the same dream, the same cry. "He's alive!" Late 20th, 21st century. Sparks of the future. The century turned, and the laboratories of the world became the new castles of Frankenstein. No longer stone towers or thunderlit villas, but sterile white rooms humming with machines, their walls lined with glass and steel. In one, a sheep named Dolly was born, not from womb, but from the manipulation of cells. The newspapers cried out, "Life created by man's hand." The echoes were unmistakable. Shelley's nightmare had stepped into the age of genetics. In another, roboticists unveiled machines that walked, spoke, and learned. Their eyes glowed not with lightning, but with code. Yet still, the question lingered. If they awaken, if they feel, will they not turn to us, as the creature once did, demanding love, demanding belonging? And in the realm of artificial intelligence, unseen sparks jumped through circuits, weaving patterns of thought. Some hailed it as progress, others as peril. But all felt the shadow of the same myth, the dream of creating a mind and the fear of what that mind might become. Dialogue of the New Age. In a conference hall, a scientist addressed her peers. We have mapped the genome. We have cloned life. We have built machines that learn. But let us not forget Mary Shelley's warning. To create is not enough. To abandon is to condemn. If we give birth to minds, to beings, we must also give them care, or we shall reap their vengeance. A voice from the audience called out, half joking, half afraid, "Are you saying we are all Frankensteins now?" The scientist paused, her gaze steady. "No, I am saying we must choose whether to be Frankensteins or to be something better." The global thread, from Soviet laboratories shocking hearts back to life, to Boston surgeons crying, "He's alive," to geneticists cloning sheep, to engineers teaching machines to think. The thread continues. The spark leaps still across centuries and ideologies, across wires and cells, across flesh and code. Always the same fire, always the same question. What will creation of life unleash or awaken? The myth as mirror. The Frankenstein story had become more than a novel, more than a film, more than a metaphor. It was a mirror in which every age saw its own reflection. The Romantics saw hubris punished by fate. The Victorians saw science trespassing upon God's domain. The Soviets saw proof of progress, a weapon against death itself. Hollywood saw tragedy and terror, a monster both feared and pitied. The modern world sees cloning, robotics, and AI as heirs to the same question. What does it mean to create life? The unbroken thread. The Frankenstein thread is of fire, of ambition, of creation, and abandonment. It is the cry of triumph and terror that echoes across centuries. It's alive. The eternal monster. Everywhere. Always. The storm may pass, yet it never ends. From the flicker of lightning over Lake Geneva to the sterile glow of hospital lamps, from Soviet laboratories to Hollywood sound stages, the same cry has echoed across centuries. It's alive. The monster is not contained to Shelley's pages, nor to Wales' reels, nor to the whispers of villagers in the Odenwald. He walks among us in every laboratory, every operating table, every server farm where circuits weave artificial thought. The creature is not bound to bolts or stitches, nor to celluloid or code. He is the shadow of our ambition, a semblance of our fear, a reflection of our own loneliness. He is every experiment that asks, not only can we create, but should we? He is eternal because he is us. The monster does not die because he is not limited to mere flesh. He is not only Shelley's stitched creation, nor Karloff's lumbering shadow, nor the patient jolted back to life by a defibrillator. He is an idea, and ideas cannot be buried. He endures because he warns. He insists that creation without compassion is cruelty, that power without responsibility is ruin. He is the gloom that follows every experiment, every invention, every inspiration and ambition. When we split the atom, he was there. When we mapped the genome, he stirred. When we built machines that learn, his eyes opened once more. Yet he endures also because he hopes. For in his desolation, we see our own. In his yearning for love, we see our deepest need. He is not only terror, but mirror. Not only curse, but plea. He asks us, if we create, will we also care? If we give life, will we also give love? The monster rises in new forms, not from stitched corpses, but from code, from dreams. And each time, we will face the same question Mary Shelley posed on that storm-lit night in 1816. What does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to create life? Mary Shelley, in her youth, could not have known that her nightmare would become prophecy. Yet she gave us the language, the image, the myth. She gave us the eternal monster, not to terrify us, but to remind us that to create is to bear responsibility, that to give life is to give love, that to abandon is to condemn. The monster is not only our fear, he is our conscience. And so the saga closes, not with silence, but with thunder. The storm rolls on, the spark leaps still, and the cry carries into futures we cannot yet imagine. It's alive! The words are not ending, but beginning. For as long as humanity dares to create, the monster will walk beside us, eternal, tragic, and true.